everyone joining this conversation of today realizes the importance of us being here, and because it's a truly unique moment when we can make sure that we are kind of not setting an undesirable precedent for the future in terms of deployment and use of AI technologies, and that the deployment and use of AI technologies will only happen when those technologies are trustworthy. And just to address also a bit the elephant in the room, the proposal of the European Commission that was published last week, it happened just 1 week ago. So I'm looking forward to see the discussion that will happen after this proposal is checked, because of course 108 pages needs to be checked and reviewed for more than a couple of days. But coming back to the trustworthiness, I think I want now to address a question to all of you to set the scene of this panel of today. What does the deployment of trustworthy artificial intelligence mean for you, and which are the most pressing challenges you foresee in the future? So I see David now on the camera. So David, if you want to address the first question. Thank you.
Yes, I'm happy to. Thanks very much. Yeah, so I work for the EU Agency for Fundamental Rights. So obviously, fundamental rights is the most important area and perspective I'm taking. Fundamental rights are enshrined in the Charter of the EU on fundamental rights. They cover all the rights of the European Convention on Human Rights and also go beyond those rights, provide more rights and further protection. And it's legally binding on the EU institutions and the member states when they act within the scope of EU law. Why I'm saying this, so I think the most important aspect is when approaching how AI might impact society, to start with fundamental rights, because it's a legally binding basis. I've seen a lot of discussions around ethics in the past years around the use of AI, which is good, which is important, but I still think the starting point for an analytical framework is the commonly agreed and legally binding fundamental rights framework. Following what the high-level expert group on AI defined, a sort of trustworthy AI was defined as being legal, ethical, and robust. And I think all the three aspects are relevant for the discussion on the fundamental rights compliant use of AI. And I think one of the biggest risks is to uptake AI without checking for any fundamental rights prior to using them. And this is a challenge because we still have quite a lack of knowledge on fundamental rights implications of AI, and more work needs to be done. So at FRA, I'm managing the research on artificial intelligence and fundamental rights, where we also did a study which we published in December last year. And I mean, we see that people understand completely different things under what AI is, and it's kind of a buzz term that is often used. And this often leads to quite abstract discussions, often linked to science fiction related discussions, which are not really useful in this respect. I mean, we saw a variety of different use cases on AI, including different levels of complexity, different levels of automation, different impact and harm, and also different scale of its use. So I think we need to increase our knowledge on real applications of AI and understand its meaning for fundamental rights, including data protection, as was mentioned, but also non-discrimination and access to an effective remedy. But I will speak more about this later on. The last sentence would be that if we ensure that AI is used in compliance with fundamental rights and human rights, then this will also lead to the technology being better taken up and also increase the trust, and also this way foster innovation. Thanks.
Thank you, David. So what I take from here is that you are kind of referring to a festina lente. So we should move slowly and carefully until we know precisely with what kind of system application we are dealing with. Thank you. Maybe Gabriela, you want to tell us a bit more about what trustworthy artificial intelligence technology means for you?
Well, David already made some excellent points, and I would not want to repeat that. Perhaps one idea to add to his points is that I think ultimately people should trust AI applications and AI systems, and this is what we should aim to achieve in this Festina Lente approach. Users should trust using such applications. Citizens should trust AI to perhaps support electoral processes or other participation, civic participation. Patients should trust AI applications and AI systems that can increase their health. And I think in order to achieve that, there is a long road. And David pointed out that people understand many different things when they hear AI. And I think this is our first challenge, to actually define the problem that we're facing or the issue that we're facing. And as he was saying, there are different levels of automation, different purposes for which AI systems are built. Some of them have to do with climate monitoring, for example. Some of them could be used for the resilience of the grid, electrical grid system. But then some of them can be used to actually target workers and maybe fire them automatically because they monitor some of their activities. And I think we need to know exactly what we're talking about, and the goal is to use this technology that can have incredible benefits in a way that's responsible, and to achieve that sweet spot where the population and people, consumers, users, citizens, patients are trusting to rely on such applications.
Okay, so thank you. You put a lot of emphasis on the trust, and actually, I think yesterday I looked a bit into the percentage of people, of companies in Europe that do not use AI because they don't trust it. And it was a survey conducted, and 68% of the companies answered that they do not use AI because they do not trust it. Though we are saying every day of our life that we interact with AI when we use our phones or PC. But thank you for also referring to the employment, because that makes the link with our speaker that has a lot of experience in recruitment and HR. And maybe Eline, you can tell us your opinion on this trustworthiness of the artificial intelligence technology.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, and I come from perhaps from the other side of that table. So working with and developing manual techniques, I've been doing that for unbiased recruitment over the past 15 years, and I have deep knowledge of the pitfalls of human behavior when it comes to collecting data for recruitment decisions, whether you're doing that manually or you're using automatically through different technologies. But deploying trustworthy technology and intelligence and technology into any recruitment process demands for deep understanding of data, what purpose it serves, and if it's relevant, and then understanding what the technology actually brings or take out from that process. Trustworthy technology in that case means that it needs to handle the relevant data in the right context. Wrongly used data might otherwise risk to duplicate itself throughout the process, or creating more problems than solutions, basically. So the case for trustworthy AI and technology should have the relationship where the solution transcends and exceeds the problems. Since bias and discrimination in recruitment is a real problem that occurs every day, and the use of technology for helping to mitigate bias and the problem is necessary, and that the problem is necessary for creating a more sustainable labor market, I believe. And from my opinion, seeing bias occur every day, the case of the solution that actually handles this problem, the solution in this case, the technology, exceeds the problem, in this case, the bias, the human bias, is crystal clear. So I think that there are still many challenges, but first and foremost, the lack of knowledge in these areas, and perhaps the most counterproductive of them all, and hindering technology from creating more solutions than problems. So whereas the problems by default becomes more important than the solution. So I'm a strong believer for using AI when it comes to creating unique experiences for people using it, and for collecting relevant data, and for presenting that data in a structured way so for its users to analyze. So shifting the user to a more analytical standpoint, basically.
Yes, thank you for your perspective. I think it's really important because indeed the other speakers are coming from the data protection and fundamental rights perspective, and your perspective in the field of developing this system is really helpful here. And you also mentioned that there is a lack of knowledge. I think this lack of knowledge comes also from the complexity of some systems, and also a bit of what we are describing and as demystifying this artificial intelligence that we saw in the movies, and then we kind of got a bit stuck with that image. Yes, thank you. But because you mentioned a lot about data and data governance, and then I'm looking now a bit at Xavier, who is coming from the European Data Protection Supervisor, who is regulating data protection. So I'm curious, what's your take on this, Xavier?
Thank you, Florina. I don't know if I will say something smart after my co-panelists have spoken, because but I will try to build upon what they said. I think that I think that the people's trust is what could make AI trustworthy. I mean, we need to clarify what's AI, what's in AI for each of us, and if we want AI as a solution for different problems. Because I think that first of all, some people are trying to sell us AI as a kind of magic wand that will solve any problem, all problems, and I think that that's wrong. And I think that is being done because we lack knowledge. I mean, as society, we are being told that AI is opaque, that AI is autonomous, that AI is depending on data that might be biased. So people are concerned, and rightfully concerned. And if we want AI to be trustworthy, what we need is to provide more clarity. Okay, so you as a citizen whose data is being processed by an AI system, or you as a stakeholder who wants to use AI as a solution for a problem, you need to have a clear idea of what's going on. And saying AI is complex, I cannot really tell you this is 97% accurate, will not make it. And so I think that we really need to start thinking on a standard way of explaining AI, of creating transparency for AI, and of measuring AI fairness, bias. Of course, there are people working on this, and there is already a lot of work done on this, but I think that we still need a lot of work in this area. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I do agree with you. And also, as a data protection expert, to be honest, I'm an enthusiastic about artificial intelligence. But indeed, I can see your point of view, because as a data protection expert, I'm thinking we cannot just throw AI to every problem we have. We really have to test and see whether that AI is indeed helpful to solve the problem. And indeed, nowadays there are people speaking about AI being the solution to each of these problems that we have. So I do agree on a certain level with you. I think both you and also Eileen, you touched a bit on the subject of bias. So I would want to go a bit further away, and not away, but further in the question, more deep into the subject, and address a question to you, Xavier, related to this concern that the development and deployment of artificial intelligence has an accuracy issue in the sense that the output resulted from the algorithm may be biased. So because your background as a computer scientist, you may probably have thought about the techniques that can be used during the training to make sure that those data that makes the system or the result biased are not visible, and in this way reducing the bias. So is there any method uh, to do that, and should that be used during the training of the artificial intelligence technologies? What's your take on that?
The short answer is yes. The long answer comes now. I would like to start by explaining a little bit what bias is, because I think that it is not so evident for everybody what is bias, what is fairness, and how we can do how we can construct fair AI systems. Okay, so bias cause AI systems to produce unfair results, and that's our main concern. I mean, a biased model or a model trained with biased data will produce unfair and often inaccurate predictions. Okay, so in the context of decision making, fairness is said to be the absence of any prejudice or favoritism toward an individual or a group based on their inherent acquired characteristics. Okay, that's one of the few definitions that I found to be more or less consistent. And there is a growing scientific literature on fairness and bias. Different authors classify different type of bias, with some articles going even listing more than 20 types of bias. Okay, some of them are very subtle, some of them are very evident. I will just mention a couple of them and examples so to everybody knows what we are speaking about. Okay, so the first one is representation bias. Okay, that refers to the presence of examples in the training data set that do not reflect the diversity and the complexity of the real world situation. That is the data set that not reflects what the reality. An example of this type of bias is the gender and racial bias found by the researcher Joy Wolamwini. This researcher proved that three facial recognition systems were significantly less accurate when recognizing the gender of dark-skinned or female individuals compared with light-skinned or male individuals. And the research analyzed the datasets used to validate these three systems' performance and found that more than 77% of the individuals were male and more than 83% of the individuals were light-skinned. And that's not representative of the real world. Historical bias reflects a bias already existing in the world. So the idea of past data representing a good idea of what the future will be. But that is not always the case, and we don't always want the future to be as our past. Okay, all systems can suffer from this type of bias, even if the system designers select the relevant features perfectly and they sample the training data set to be also perfectly well known. You can suffer from historical bias. A well-known example of this is when a research showed that an image search in Google for the term CEO resulted in much fewer female CEO images. And if that would not be bad enough, the first picture was Barbie in a suit. This was due to the fact that only 5% of the Fortune 500 CEOs were women. So the dataset that was used to train the algorithm included very few women and many men. Designers of AI try to avoid bias by measuring fairness in AI system. So the problem is that there is no one definition of fairness. There are many. And the AI designers use fairness metrics to ensure their systems are fair. But since there are different fairness metrics, no AI system can meet all conditions for all metrics. And this is exactly what happened in the controversy that followed the ProPublica article about race bias in Compass recidivism prediction system. The fairness metric that ProPublica was using was not the same that the system designer used. So there was no possible agreement in between them, as there was no. Does this mean that avoiding bias and designing fair AI system is impossible? Definitely not. This means that designing AI systems need a systematic and documented approach on how to avoid bias and measure the system fairness. And this also means that those who are willing to use a system will have to review the information provided by the system vendors and check not only on the accuracy, but also on the system fairness metric to know if this fairness metric is adequate to their specific use case. Because I can design a system thinking that a fairness metric is good for a specific use, but if the customer doesn't think so, then we have a problem. About specific tools and techniques, there are quite a lot of fairness frameworks that I know more than 10. They are tools that AI designers can use to detect and mitigate bias. I will mention just a few of them, and I can later provide some links to these fairness metrics, fairness frameworks. One of them, very well known, is IBM developed AI Fairness 360. That it's a toolkit designed to move fairness into an industrial setting, and it intends to have a benchmark for fairness algorithms. Google created Fairness Indicator, that is a tool that is easily integrated with TensorFlow toolkit and has been tested to work in past datasets. Microsoft was involved in FairLearn, a Python package for assessing AI system fairness and mitigate observed unfairness issues. And Equitas is also a bias audit toolkit that was developed by the Center for Data Science and Public Policy at the University of Chicago. It allows auditing machine learning models for discrimination and bias. And I think that those are the first four that I could mention, but there are some others, and I'm sure Ellen knows all of them. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you very much for this classification. It was really interesting. I put down some of the points that you mentioned, and indeed, I want to head over to Eileen because she's probably very much in the theme, so she can tell us a bit more about the Tengai robot and what this system that she developed is an example of. And does it have to mitigate the impact of discrimination and the bias that Xavier was mentioning?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, so just for everyone who doesn't know about Tengai, Tengai is an interview intelligence platform developed for creating a more structured interview and collecting relevant interview data without human interference. We're using conversational AI, behavioral science, and data collection methods for automating interviews, basically, and for digitalizing interviews to help organizations to mitigate bias in their interviews. We structured interviews for making better and more informed decisions. So the AI part of our solution is mainly focusing on giving candidates a unique and engaging experience while answering questions connected to behavioral science research. So that's the whole foundation of Tengai. And I mean, as I mentioned here earlier, recruitment bias is one of the most critical problems to the future labor market, I believe. And if we can find solutions and technology to solve that problem, I think that we definitely should. But Tengai is basically an example of how we can use technology for mitigating bias in the recruitment process. Most of those biases occur from having irrelevant data, and the purpose of our solution is to eliminate those possible pitfalls of human recruiters or hiring managers, and the potential biases that comes from making judgment from, for example, age or gender or ethnicity or looks or appearance. Or cultural differences, etc. And that normally happens in a human-to-human interview and the human-to-human meeting. So by creating a more of a safe environment for job seekers, where it's possible to collect data that's not based on looks or appearance, etc., but more collect relevant data, behavioral science data that's being based upon that one instead. Based on job seekers by their own words, for describing different situations, for making own statements of different solutions, etc. So I think that from the recruitment standpoint, as humans, we make a lot of snap judgment. We use seconds, only seconds, to make a first impression, right? And from that impression, that might be from a person's appearance. We get the first impression, and that impression also tends to stick with us throughout the process, coloring our judgment in different ways. According to several studies on that topic, I think that from the first impressions, we could actually see from one study that hiring managers stated that they made their first decision based upon a candidate's handshake, or from if a candidate had a tattoo, or if they had the possibility to keep eye contact, if they had too much or too little makeup, etc. And that are only visual aspects of the recruitment process. All of these things, and probably we probably do them unconsciously, right? But therefore, it's really hard to mitigate bias just by making us aware of that we have them. And we really need good tools for helping us to focus on the relevant stuff instead, such as understanding personality, abilities, knowledge, motivation, potential, etc. So for putting that relevant data into the right context, which is the role that we're recruiting for and nothing else. It doesn't matter what kind of personal interests you have, what your family situation look like. What matters is how you're going to perform in that future role, nothing else. So when using Tengai, the application is basically, it's actually blind for that type of biases, since it doesn't take visualization into consideration. It presents only the stripped answers to a human recruiter, and giving them the possibility to compare the isolated and structured outcome between candidates. So the set of questions used in this interview is a structured questions mixed between statements and open-ended questions. And it is combining several different behavioral science methods and theories and science. And the framework has been also actually validated from scientists and proven to present results connected to future work performance. So therefore, used early in the recruitment process, we can mitigate bias and focus in on the relevant and more important data that is both measurable and predictive without being colored by irrelevant data such as age or gender or ethnicity or skin color. So that's basically the purpose and the practitioner of Tengai.
Thank you for giving us this presentation. I saw today on LinkedIn, I saw the way it looks from one of your customers, and also some times ago I was listening to a panel where actually it was said that we humans we are not prepared yet to have a discussion with an AI, or either it's a chatbot or in this case your recruitment system. So yeah, I'm very curious to see how this will develop over time, because probably we'll be more and more used to interact. But at least at this point in time in 2021, we are still a bit reluctant in the interaction, and you can see by studying different features of the way we speak, the way our body reacts to the discussion with the AI. It's still a bit too early for us. But yeah, I'm looking forward to see how this will evolve in the future. And from here, I think I would want to ask our thank you, Elin. I would want to ask our fundamental rights expert here, David, because I think it's very much in connection with your study, what we already touched upon. And I know we're speaking a lot about privacy when we refer to artificial intelligence, and the fact that new technologies provoke the data privacy concept and data protection. But can you give us a bit more more details on the other fundamental rights that we should take in consideration, and that are impacted by the deployment and use of artificial intelligence technologies?
Yes, sure, of course. Thanks very much. No, very interesting input from previous speakers already. I mean, as you said, also in the beginning, of course, data protection is at the heart of AI discussions, also with respect to other fundamental rights. And I think that's for two reasons. I mean, first, it is a core concern in relation to the use of AI because most of the applications, not all, but most relevant to fundamental rights make use of personal data. So it's subject to data protection law. And secondly, I also think that the European data protection law, most notably the GDPR, provides a strong legal framework that can also be used to safeguard, to some extent, other fundamental rights. For example, in a paper in 2018 that the Fundamental Rights Agency published on discrimination in data-supported decision-making when using algorithms, we also use data protection principles to address some of the issues linked to non-discrimination, because data protection is a unique framework that also addresses several of these new challenges, mostly linked to automated decision making, like in Article 22 of the GDPR. However, in our study, we also find that those using AI are not always entirely clear how to apply data protection. And in general, there were several discussions if this framework is enough to safeguard fundamental rights. And I think the answer we have already at hand. I mean, we see from the initiatives of the European Commission, the European Parliament, also important to mention the Council of Europe and many others, that it's not enough and more needs to be done. And that's also linked to the policy initiatives of the past years and ongoing ones. So which other rights are impacted beyond data protection? Non-discrimination, I don't need to mention. Article 21 of the Charter, it's a core problem. It was discussed by previous speakers, linked to biased training data, non-representative data, lack of information in data sets, and also because it just might reflect societal inequalities. And I mean, also there's often a misunderstanding on non-discrimination that people think if you leave out information on protected characteristics, that then it does not lead to discrimination. And this is not necessarily true. And often it involves quite some detective work. As Xavier said, I mean, it depends on the context, and discrimination, fairness cannot be automated. And this is why it's a challenging area. So, but to mention a few other rights, access to an effective remedy is Article 47 of the Charter. That's a very important one. People have the right to an effective remedy, and people need to be able to contest decisions being made about them. And if AI was used for such decisions, then people need to know, first of all, that AI was used. Second, they need to know actually how and where to complain about this. And those using AI would then need to be able to explain their decisions, which is not always easy when you use modern or new technologies. Just to mention a few other rights, good administration, Article 41 in the Charter is a very important and strong right in the EU. It includes principles of transparency, of fair decisions, and also access to one's file that reflect actually what is also in data protection law and in other rights, but it's also just another principle and right that reflects the same issues and is important and at risk if it's not adhered to. Consumer protection is also very relevant. For example, when it comes to targeted advertising, we saw that only 41% of Europeans interviewed in a Eurobarometer heard about the right that they can opt out from targeted advertising. So that's obviously a problem. The European Consumer Organization also made a survey and showed that half of consumers in Europe think that AI is used to manipulate consumer decisions. So that's another important concern. And then I'm aware of the time, but I could continue because AI is a technology that can be used in virtually all areas of life. And this way it impacts on all rights. And you can go through the Charter from beginning to the end and find relevant aspects. To mention a few, the freedom of expression and information is very relevant. Let's think about the use of algorithms to support online content moderation. The right to assembly and association, let's think about the use of facial recognition technology in public spaces. Then the right to education, we had examples of AI in the education sector, the right to asylum. We know border management agencies are really keen to use AI in different areas and so forth. So I could continue for long. And this again makes the point that AI can easily interfere with several fundamental rights. This interference takes place in context. And this is why a fundamental rights impact assessment is an important tool that can be used to assess this specific interference. And yeah, only in rare occasions it's also permissible to interfere with a certain rights like data protection. But if this can be allowed, I mean, there's a clear test that needs to be followed, and it's only possible like if it's necessary, legitimate, and proportionate. Yeah, as we have on the discussions of the use of AI in law enforcement. I'll stop here. Thank you.
Yes, thank you for this list, and that means that we are really welcoming the new proposal from the European Commission, which actually comes up with a comprehensive regulation to protect fundamental rights, specifically in the context of AI. Especially because so many of the fundamental rights that you just listed for us are impacted by the use of this technology. And of course, there are different types of technologies. They are classified in high risk and lower risk technologies. So we shouldn't refer to all of them as impacting each of these fundamental rights that you just mentioned. But it's just good to have take in consideration this long list provided by you. And I'm also a bit aware of the time that we have a bit limited for this type of discussion, because I think we could discuss for the whole afternoon the subject we have in hands today. But I want to go to Gabriela and to ask her more about what's the way forward and how she foresees that we need to move forward in order to kind of address these issues that we raised here today.
Thank you, Florina, for that, and thanks to the panelists for all of their input and considerations. I know you asked me to look forward, but I would like to look backwards for a bit at the beginning, and perhaps give more insight into why we are so many data protection specialists, data protection law specialists in these conversations on AI. And I want to look backwards to 1978, which is the year when the first French data protection law, the first data protection law was adopted in France. It entered into force in 1979. And I'm going back there because in Article 2 of that law from 78, again, many years ago, there actually was a provision saying that first, no court decision, but also no administrative decision and no private decision involving an assessment of human behavior may have as a basis only automated processing of information, giving a definition of the profile or the personality of the person. So what I'm trying to say with this is that from the very beginning of this field of data protection law, automated decision-making, automated processes based on assessing behavior and personality of individuals were at the core of it. This is Article 2 of that first data protection law in France, and that was an area, a period of time when data protection laws were emerging in Western Europe. So this is why we are very much involved in this conversation. As David was saying, there are so many fundamental rights that can be potentially touched, interfered with by AI systems, by automated processing, also not necessarily AI, but also other automated processes. And we have a set of tools in data protection law that we are able to use for already for these systems and for protecting the rights of data subjects. I would also look very recently into two court cases in the Netherlands that involved drivers from Uber and Ola. Ola is an Uber-like mobile application that actually explore Article 22 of the GDPR on on the prohibition for solely automated decision making that has a legal or similarly important effect, similarly significant effect on an individual. And already using that provision in the GDPR, the court has found that there needs to be a human that is involved in the decision making if that type of decision is allowed even under one of the few exceptions to this prohibition. And there's already a requirement that the logic involved in that decision making should be explained to the drivers. And I think those, I think we will start to see more and more already the use of data protection law as it was meant to be from the very beginning, you know, and have a significant role in this process. And for the future, indeed, what I'm seeing is perhaps a bit more use of the tools we already have in law, and then building on those, taking into account the unique nature of this, you know, technology. And as I was saying, we really need to start understanding exactly what this AI means and what it is, and what are the different levels of automation, of machine learning, and we need to really be able to define it. Yeah, so building on what we have and then addressing the specific risks with the additional tools. But let's not forget what we already have there.
Thank you. Thank you. So it was really, I didn't really know about this French legislation from 1978. Thank you for bringing that up and let us know, let us all know when the first privacy article on automated decision was already existing. So that was a nice information to have. I think based on what you said, let's build on what we have. I think that the European institutions are very well at creating laws and regulating. I think there is a lot happening out there with the data strategy that they have, and in addition to the GDPR that's already in place, so we have so many other legislation coming up, and I think we are kind of trying to build on the GDPR. So we have now the data protection and we protect the personal data. So let's move forward and see how we can use that data. And I think that's indeed the direction as you were mentioning. But I'm looking now a bit at Xavier, because he's, again, I underline this is coming from the regulator perspective. So what's from your Brussels location, what's the next step for artificial intelligence technologies?
Okay. Saying that we need some consistent regulatory framework will not come as a surprise. But I think that I mean, my impression is that right now, AI designers and developers, or at least some of them, are kind of reinventing the wheel in an effort to build trustworthy systems. Okay, so there is no. I think that there is no agreed standards on how to do a lot of things that are need to be done in order to build trust on AI systems. So we need to work on standards in order to measure bias and to measure fairness, and also we need to work in the education so the people understand what they buy when they buy AI, and what's the meaning of these systems is going to use equality of odds or equality of opportunity, if that is going to affect something that is relevant for you. Because if I'm telling you that and you have no idea, and I can tell you it is not really easy to understand that if you are not given examples in a way that someone that is not familiar with probability and mathematics will not get it easily. So we need to build on the education, we need some consistent regulation that gives powers to the regulators in order to check that what the designers and the developers do is what they say they do. And of course, we need some standards in order for to clear a little bit the burden for the developers, because of course AI can bring a lot of nice stuff and we should benefit from it. But and for that, I think it will be very, very worthy to have a set of standards that we can all agree upon. And we need a lot of talking in between not only the policymakers and the regulators, but also with the industry and also with the civil rights organization and with the society at all. Because I think that right now that conversation is only going in bilateral, and I think it should be multilateral. Thank you.
Thank you, Xavier. Thank you for this input. And I'm looking now at the time and I would really want to hear also from David and Eileen also their idea on how to move forward. So I will immediately give the floor to one of them. I don't know, maybe Eileen, you want to tell us a bit more on what's the next steps?
Yeah, I think that, you know, from the perspective of the recruitment industry and the future work, I think there is the way forward is to help the evolution and the evolution of regulation to match the evolution of technology. And this is I think this is a hard balance. Today, the regulation for privacy doesn't really open up for nuances or grades in high risk and low risk, for example, and automatically people instead are afraid of technology and the use of it, since it's painted up as discriminatory. And I think that's a large problem from implementing new technology, basically. So there are definitely high risk areas where we should be more cautious of the use of AI. But there are also already today areas such as recruiting where the actual discrimination from humans conducting it is severe. And I think that the discrimination there is often done under the radar since it's human behavior, right? So that could definitely benefit from using technology and structured data to present for humans and for humans still to make the decision based upon the relevant data. So that could definitely benefit from technology. And I think that we also, as just coping in on what everyone's saying here, that we need to educate the population of how to be aware and how to be compliant in order to the ecosystem of privacy and technology to function. So I think that's from my perspective, at least, the way of going forward.
Okay, thank you very much, Aline. I can see your perspective, and I'm sure David has an answer to that.
I don't have the answer, but I have
just
no.
I
Just to point to a few other things. I really liked what previous speaker was saying. Also like Gabriela's, like looking to the past and the future judgments. It's really great and sees how important it's an ongoing process also in this area. So I would say the way forward is we should also work with the ongoing policy processes. I mean, the Commission's work on the one hand, but also, as I mentioned, the Council of Europe is looking into this topic, and they are tackling the important questions at the right time. So I think it's really important to constructively support these initiatives from all different areas and angles, because as we heard before about the challenges, it's not the most novel contribution, but it's still important to highlight that we have to work together, and it really comes from the different disciplines. I mean, like me coming with a statistics training from social science, first reading about from computer scientists, it just takes a while to really understand that sometimes people talk about exactly the same things, but just use different words. So in this area, it's even more important that we work from different disciplines, but also different stakeholders. Listen to the important contribution of civil society in this area will help us to make it much better. The Fundamental Rights Agency's role is, among other issues, to provide data and analysis on these issues. And apart from contributing with our previous research, we are also continuing to do research, for example, in the area of bias and algorithms, with a potential report coming in 22, and also other areas that we look into. But I also think there should be more funding on research on understanding bias and discrimination when using algorithms. There's a lot more to do. But just to end on also a positive note, I think looking into technologies where things can go wrong has a very positive impact, because AI and algorithms only work if there are some structures, some consistent regularities in human behavior. And only when looking into it, we will find out maybe about new structures and hidden structures, and including those we would like to avoid. So checking AI for fundamental rights issues actually helps also us understanding society better, and that's definitely something we should push forward.
Thank you, David. So actually, your conclusion is that this should be a teamwork, and then it opens so many possibilities for so many people, because AI is actually this technology that has so many horizontal impact on different areas. And again, I'm repeating myself. We could speak about it from different perspectives. But unfortunately, today we don't have the time for it. I think we are already 1 hour in the discussion. I'm just looking a bit into the chat. Thank you, Gabriela, for sending the French article. I see somebody referring to a recruitment shortlisting bias arising from artificial intelligence. This can be countered by decision which mix AI and human judgment, guaranteeing diversity in short lists. Thank you for the comment. I think there is no question here. It's just a comment from our participants. From the beginning, I didn't say that you can ask your question into the chat. Sorry for that. But if there are some question, then let us know, because it's already 1 hour in the discussion. So I don't want to keep you more than we initially scheduled. And I think most of the questions that we had were answered, but for sure we will have more opportunities to discuss. And for sure, the new proposal from the European Commission will open even more opportunities to discuss and to comment on their proposal, on how they decided to move forward with the artificial intelligence technologies. But in the end, European Union remains the only region, or the first region, let's hope for this, that regulated the artificial intelligence. And even though we keep on saying that the GDPR actually was technologically neutral and was already offering the path to use these new technologies, I think with this new regulation, and probably we will discuss it for years, and it will enter into force in some years from now on, but it will open again a chance to discuss and to bring all our input, because as David said, I think it's important to have a teamwork, and it's important to use the expertise of all of us. Either that we are coming from the data protection perspective, or fundamental rights, or scientists, data scientists, computer scientists, and business perspective. So I think that's my take, and that's the conclusion. And I really want to thank you for being here today and for participating in this panel. I hope you enjoyed it, and thank you again for being here. And let's see each other again.